Lisa Heimann. She's EVP Corporate Research and Strategy at NBCUniversal Media. Come on and bring up your panelists, and we can talk all about apps and how to measure them.
1 second. How do you say your last name?
Yeah, you can just say Natasha too. Come from the other side.
Okay. Great. There's nothing grateful
Big
about
chair,
getting in
I
these
know,
big chairs. Especially when you're shorter, it's like, okay, this is.
Oh, I was going to attempt. Can you guys hear me? The mic on? Not yet. Can you guys hear me? Nope, still no. We trying to turn my mic on? Can you hear me now? No? Yes? Maybe?
Keep talking?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right, we will speak up. So actually, rather than me trying to go through and maybe butcher everybody's names.
It's tough. That's a tough list.
I am Lisa Heimann from NBCU.
Colleen Fahey from ViacomCBS.
Julie DeTraglia from Hulu.
Nathalie Bordes, CBS Interactive.
Natasha, Hritzuk, WarnerMedia Entertainment.
So we're really lucky. When I realized this was a panel of all women, I got super excited. And they're actually, mostly I've known for a long time, and Natasha and I just met, so fast friends. So, but I also just love that we've had experience in a lot of different parts of the business, and so as streaming has evolved, so has researchers, and I think that's really cool to see. And so we're also representing a lot of different businesses and different business models between CBS All Access and Hulu and Pluto, soon to come HBO Max. I'm sort of representing Peacock, which is also awesome. So it's a pretty good panel. So with that, I think we're gonna dive in, and thought we'd kind of start with looking at this from the consumer point of view, and thinking about what kind of things we're learning about how consumers are enjoying the content and how they're navigating all the different options inside the streaming service. And for those of us who also have traditional channels, how is that interaction taking place? So I don't know if anybody wants to volunteer to jump in. All right.
I'm happy to
I'm looking at
start.
Natalie. She's going for it.
Natalie's going first.
I'm going for it. With CBS Interactive, we have essentially almost like a consumer funnel, because we have, obviously, we are, part of it is digital destination for CBS linear brand. We are also an SVOD service provider, and we also have AVOD brands, so with CBSN or CBS Sports HQ for some of the sports fans here, or ET Live if you like celebrity gossip like I do. So we have really multiple touch points with consumers, and the goal is ultimately to funnel consumers through multiple apps and through multiple products, just purely because that makes it easier for them to also have one destination where they can find multiple content points. The interesting thing that we've learned, actually, in particular, in doing measurement and research around the subscription service, what brings you in is maybe the content. It's really like, oh yes, for example, we launched earlier this month Star Trek Picard. I'm a little bit addicted and biased. Yes, I am a Trekkie. So ultimately, seeing this brings people in. But then understanding really how the product experience really makes them move along, which features really ultimately make them then also turn into a paying customer, because we first offer them a free trial, but then what makes them really convert in that form. And then we want to ultimately also make sure that we're retaining them. So we're looking actually at the subscriber in a continuum and the consumer in the continuum. Bringing them in, we look at a show level attribution model, we call it SLAM. So we first SLAM the consumer, then when we're looking at our conversion features to really understand in detail what makes them convert into a paying customer. So T-top, trial to paid model. And then we have a subscriber at risk model that we built. And the goal is really for us to predict if someone is at a risk to churn. So subscriber at risk model abbreviates to SCARP, so we don't want them to SCARP out. So that is ultimately how we're looking at the consumer in that form, to really understand on every touch point how they are behaving and what are really the behaviors that they're exhibiting, so that I can feed them the content or the product experience that they need.
Yeah.
Go after. Oh, should we do the CBS thing or the Nathalie Natasha?
I'll just jump in about Pluto. So Pluto is free. So free is a really enticing thing for people.
Yep.
And so it's really easy for them to slide in. They don't have to put their credit card information there. They just start using it. And so that makes it really easy for us to just get a lot of sampling and experimentation. I think that one of the things that delights Pluto users the most is the fact that there's so much content. There's such a depth and breadth of channels, right? Sports and news and movies and entertainment, and it's free. Like, there's a little noise sometimes around the word free. Like, free is a really powerful word, but then when you start thinking about it, but like, maybe it's not that good, or maybe it's free for the first week and then I have to pay, or there can be some noise. And when people find out that it actually is just free, they're like, oh my gosh, this is great. And that, in addition to just how easy it is to use Pluto, it feels like kind of like cable, and just like, channel up, looking for something, you could search, and it feels really familiar to people. So that is sort of comforting, especially if they have cut the cord and maybe they're missing it a little bit.
Yep.
So I would say, first of all, you guys have way better acronyms than we do, but they're all similar models. I mean, we're all trying to do the same thing: get more people to Hulu, get them to watch more, understand when they might be at risk of churning out, and how do we feed them content to make sure that they stay, or some kind of messaging to make sure that they stay. And same thing, we have massive depth of content. We also have, obviously, a live service as well, so we get to see the crossover between the live service and the SVOD library. And we've said this before, but of people who have Hulu Live, only about half of their viewing is actually live, and the rest of it's some version of on demand. And most of the live is news and sports, although there's definitely a lot of day and date, particularly for broadcast networks, of showing up and watching the show when it's in schedule. But the vast majority of their viewing is in the on demand, either through SVOD or through, we call it MPVOD, so the set-top box VOD.
You
from
do
the networks.
have
Yeah, we do have. We got a ton of them. They're just not as good as those. We don't have Slam. We call it new subs to series. It's kind of boring. So, I agree. One of the things that we definitely know is that programs, particularly originals and exclusives, drive subscribers, but it's not necessarily what keeps them. So it's really important, but it's also important to have a huge breadth of content so that you keep them engaged. Hulu has 85,000 episodes of television. It would take a really long time to get through all of those. It's also very difficult to surface them, well, to make sure that people kind of get through that discovery phase when they're looking for content. But I would say that we just think less about individual programs as much as we do about the segmentation that we have of our subscribers and the types of content that they watch. And we want to make sure that each of those segments are sort of have the right amount of content to make sure that we keep them viewing and keep them sort of served at the amount that we need them to. So if we're losing content or if we're gaining content, that's how we make decisions around acquiring content or going out and making originals. And then, finally, what I'll say is that one of the places, for example, that we made a big investment this year, at least on the original side, is in comedy. So we went pretty deep. We did Rami, one Golden Globe winner. We did the 80 Bryant show, totally losing with Shrill, there you go, second season just dropped. And what we found was that people came for those. They both got a lot of press. They got great reviews, and then they just want more and more comedy. So once you sort of know where they come in, you know sort of what to feed them after that, and that's another way to keep people engaged.
So we're in the interesting position of having not launched yet. So we're, and I've been kind of in my weird little consumer insights-y fashion trying to approach it in a slightly different way. I think when the decision was made to build this app, suddenly it became this kind of like mushrooming of content. And every piece of research that we were doing was sending strong signals to me that certainly the volume of content does count for something. You don't want to have 25 pieces on the app. But then what I started to realize very quickly is that without the right sort of mechanisms to help people discover content, that the viewing experience had to be given equal attention to the type of content that we have sitting on the app. So we've been doing a lot of research on different types of viewing journeys. So if people are coming in with a specific title in mind, how do they navigate the home screen to get there? What role, for example, do our brands play? And when you think about our world, we've got HBO, which is kind of, definitely a brand that's known. People, I think, have pretty clear expectations about what they're going to land on if they go to an HBO brand hub. Then we've got a lot of these smaller brands like True TV, TBS, TNT. So what I've been really, I mean, the content's getting produced, but I'm putting a lot of my effort now into figuring out how do we curate that in a meaningful way so that you can keep people sort of engaged and landing on the right content that they're looking for depending on what journey they've embarked on. And then I think the other piece is too, like sometimes, you know, you have this fear that even if you have all the content in the world that people hopefully can discover it's curated in a way that's sensible. How do you keep people engaged beyond the content? So some of the work that we're doing right now is looking at what else should live on that app, like what other ancillary content experiences should be sitting there adjacent to the core content. I mean, you know, we're floating a whole bunch of different options, but like what role for short form, what role for podcasts, what role for all the other ancillary pieces that create the worlds around the core content. So we're kind of, you know, approaching it from a number of different angles. But, you know, that's the sort of thing that you do kind of pre-launch where you're effectively trying to optimize as much as you can so that when people enter it for the first time, it's a really fluid, intuitive, and rewarding experience for them.
Kind of off of that, what do you guys see or are able to comment on the role of personalized recommendations, and or if you want to go a different direction, some of the tech around voice-activated search, et cetera. Just kind of curious if anyone wants to speak to that.
I mean, we talked about this probably a year ago now, that among the people who use their voice to control their Hulu, so it's basically Amazon Echo to Fire TV Stick, they were like 2 or 3 times more engaged in Hulu. But we don't really know specifically why that is. It could just be that they were more advanced users as it was. It could be they're able to discover content more easily. We're not really sure, but we know that that happens to be true. And, you know, we made an investment to make sure that we're doing, you know, enabling technology to do that. I do think it is a pretty interesting way to be able to find and discover content. I'm still one of those people that finds it weird to talk to something in my house that's not a person.
But to your kids?
I mean, they do it a lot
talking
more.
at the TV.
Yeah. It's funny how they can just command it too.
Yeah.
You know, they can't talk to me that way, but they can. So they're like, Alexa, do this. But so, what was the first part of the question?
Personalized recommendations.
The recommendations. Yeah. So one of the things we found, we've iterated on our user experience a lot. We had a big change when we launched live about almost 3 years ago now, where we really went to these big cinematic pictures. Images, and we had a very different look than, for example, what like Netflix has right now. We've iterated that on over the years. We've densified the content a little bit more so that you can sort of find more in that experience, because you got to get people to go deep so they can, you know, see how much content we have. But one of the things we found from doing primary research is that even when you program a collection, for example, everybody believes that it's a recommendation for them. So if you're not really clear about that, then they're like, well, why did they tell me this? This is not what I want to watch. So you have to be really clear about what all of your titling means. Otherwise, people are just like, why is it recommending this to me when it's not what I watch? Otherwise, the recommendation engines work. We do a process when you get Hulu called a taste picker, where you go in and you say, I like this sports team if it's live. I like, you know, this event. I like these types of shows, these genres, these programs. So there's a human portion where you go and tell it. And then, obviously, we know exactly what you're watching, and then we can surface content that way. But I think if you ask a consumer, they will tell you, I don't think recommendation engines work, which is why we have a whole team of human people who also program the service based on a lot of different factors.
Yeah. It's such a tough one with I mean, recommendations and algorithms have been sort of, you know, legitimately maligned for a while. And I think, you know, if they're based on past viewing behavior, we all know that you may have watched 8 things in the past month and you may have hated 4 of them, and then that's feeding into what you watch next. But the other thing that we're starting to see a lot of is that people want some agency over their viewing experience and want to actually proactively make the choice themselves and not necessarily have a third party, even the service, make that decision on their behalf. And so then it becomes kind of this fine-grained decision around, right, to what extent are we delivering serendipity and facilitating discovery through an algorithm that hopefully has a broader data window than just what you watched in the past, coupled with giving people the ability to guide their own curation and build sort of their own playlists or build their own on-screen experience that starts to narrow the choice in a way that is more intuitive for them. And we just actually this morning got a new piece of research back that sort of made my blood run a little bit cold, because what we found, and these were with advanced consumers, but they were saying that they are so tired of being in the echo chamber, and they feel like algorithms reinforce the echo chamber. So I was thinking, wait, but they weren't relevant. Now it's your echo chamber. And they were saying, they want to be sort of exposed to things that they might not intuitively like, but they might learn something or be pushed out of their comfort zone. I'm thinking, oh my God, how do you get the algorithm to now serve you up stuff that you actually didn't think you would like, because instinctively it goes against your profile? So I guess,
It is. It seems to be ultimately what we've learned is there is a mixture of that. We are using machine learning-based algorithms, just purely because with tens of thousands of episodes and with a large variety of shows, including live TV, you need to kind of like find a way for people to resurface or to surface content to them that might hit really also their taste buds in that form. But at the same time, like they say, they want to have some sort of right to be part of that decisioning process. That can be in the beginning when they're selecting a whole slew of shows to give you a little bit of an understanding of what type of a flavor you are. We did, for example, an interesting project within our team. It is ultimately where we asked them a slew of shows, our own shows, competitive shows, and then we built actually a data graph underneath it to really understand, okay, what drives certain correlations between shows and things like that, their preferences. We call it C-Rex.
Another one.
Just, yes, yeah. So really coming up ultimately with recommendations, and using that tool, we were able to differentiate people into very light personas, into heavy personas, or even sci-fi personas. Interestingly enough, I am a dark persona, so go figure. But the interesting thing about that was really learning really what are the correlations between certain show behaviors and the actors that are in there, potentially even the director that is in it. For some of the movies, it was even kind of like what was the movie studio. It was very fascinating just to have these learnings. So that is one approach, but then also, how do I deliver on a regular basis really readily, easily accessible recommendations, allow people to sample something, and then when it was sampled and they didn't like it, which can happen, how do you also make sure that that kind of like sampling is not tainting your recommendations? Because that is also something that you want to be sure that you give them the chance of removing, for example, a show from their shows you watch, carousels, and all of these pieces, so that you really feed that continuously into your recommendation models. So the data that needs to flow and also the pace in which it has to flow is quite fascinating.
Definitely have some of the best names for things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my team has a Slack channel, and whenever we need to name something, we just put it in there. You would be fascinated. A team of analysts and researchers, very creative people, very creative.
I'm sure they're all politically correct too. So if we think about this from a sort of the business standpoint, right? And I think you were touching on this in terms of free, but sort of in terms of how you guys position in the marketplace, where you have multiple options, whether it's sort of free to full subscription or many, many blends in between. Can you guys speak a little bit about sort of research that's around that, or what you've learned? I'm going to go to you first for free is good.
Free is has been the big lead, and we're actually doing research now to try to figure out, well, since free maybe doesn't sound like special, how can we make it free and special, and how can we build marketing messages that will make sense and sort of combine something more powerful than just like free. So we're actually on that journey right now. But I actually have a question that I wanted to ask you, because you guys have done a really big campaign around reality.
Oh yeah.
Which I saw that big, beautiful signage on Fifth Avenue. And I was just wondering, is that like are you guys pivoting into trying to remind people that it's not just like Modern Family and sitcoms, that it's bunch of
Yeah, I mean,
reality show?
the short answer is yes. I mean, we embarked on a new brand campaign about a year and a half ago now called Better Ruins Everything. And it was based on this insight that once you try something better, you never go back to the old thing. So you put bacon on your cheeseburger, you always put bacon on your cheeseburger. You get a walk-in closet, you never go back. You sit in first class, you never want to sit in coach. So that's the viewing experience that Hulu gives you. And, you know, we have a lot of products, right? So we have the $5.99 ad-supported, $11.99 no ads, and then the now $55 live, and then add-ons like HBO, Showtime, Cinemax, and Stars, and all kinds of different tiers of, you know, storage and all that stuff. So we try to put that all under, like, we put live and on-demand together. This is better television, it's a better experience. So we took that there, and then we also know what people are watching, and we also were marketing the live service. So we started with Hulu Has Live Sports. That was our first sort of kind of content-based campaign, because we know that football season drives subs and sports drive subs. It gets them in the funnel of at least doing live, and then they get to experience everything else. And we're okay with people switching, you know, around the tiers, as long as we keep them there. So once we did that, we were like, you know, we have all this sort of genre information about how people are viewing. Reality is a really popular genre on the service. We have a lot of content from a lot of different networks. We're, you know, talking about doing some of our own unscripted. So it's just a way to remind people there's so much content, there's so much confusion about what content's out there. We did, in the fall, we did one called Hulu, we kept the Hulu Has thing. So Hulu Has All the Stars, that was sort of like fall broadcast season, and then we went to Hulu Has Reality TV, and there'll be more of that, because it just sort of makes really clear to consumers that, oh, I didn't know that stuff was all there, and I know that I can get all from Hulu. So we've always had this notion of all your TV in one place, like that sort of thing, that's a better experience, and we've tried to do it in that sort of distinct brand voice that, you know, we've worked really hard to maintain. That really was part of foundationally the way Hulu started. And, you know, it's really all meant to just remind people the content that's there.
It's been interesting with, because we're, you know, still in the process of formulating everything. So you're getting kind of the, like, there's sort of a maturity curve here. But
5 years and counting.
But, you know, I think one of the challenges that we have, it's kind of the challenge opportunity bundled into one piece, which is, you know, when we became WarnerMedia, it was the marriage of HBO, it was the marriage of all the Turner brands, and then the marriage of Warner Brothers. So on the surface, it's a really rich vault of content. And I think now really the key is to kind of make sure that what we're doing is not just saying like, you know, vast amounts of everything you could possibly imagine, from like the Maltese Falcon and the Wizard of Oz through to Impractical Jokers, because it, you know, it's bewildering, and it, you know, effectively when you're building a brand, the last thing you want to do is dilute it. It's got to have some sort of inherent meaning. And, you know, I think it's probably not so surprising that we're calling it HBO Max. I mean, we are leading with HBO, and that's without question. But I think the idea is that once you start to bring in some of the assets from Warner Brothers and that historical collection of films that have been, you know, produced since the, you know, in some instances since the 20s and 30s, and then you bring in some of the, you know, contemporary pieces that Turner's also, we've also got TCM, trying to figure out what to do with Criterion, because that, when Filmstruck got struck, there was a lot of backlash, so how do we fold that in? And so now we're actually going through, you know, what feels like a pretty rudimentary task of just understanding the relative weight of all the brands, which I think in turn will help us understand the hierarchy of communications when we launch. But, you know, HBO is always going to be at the heart of it, and then it's, you know, what other ancillary pieces, like what is that Max piece, and how do we populate that with meaning?
So it wouldn't be, you know, a good panel if we didn't talk about measurement, where I know there's going to be different schools of thought here. But, you know, when we think about measurement, right, there's so many different business models. There's so much to go beyond just adding up sort of total audiences. And most of what we're spending our time talking about has not been just how many. It's been, you know, sort of how do viewers find things, you know, well beyond that. So I'd be curious in terms of what are your some general thoughts on measurement? Can it be one stop fits all? How do you sort of manage, and how do we, you know, as we work with different measurement vendors, et cetera, and balance third-party measurement versus first-party measurement? I know there's some strong opinions here, so whoever wants to go for it first.
I definitely have some strong opinions about that. So there are so many layers to measurement, in particular, I think, in the fields that we are working in, because there's, on the one hand, how do I make sure that I have all of the information to build and maintain a product that is a great customer experience? So that is a level of granularity that really means that, okay, is this button working, and how many people are using it, how are they using it? So that's a level of granularity that no advertiser ever wants to be exposed to unless I sell a sponsorship account, associated with it. Then there's that level of, okay, my senior executives want to understand how big is their footprint, or how certain content performing. That's the other layer of measurement. And then you have the third level of measurement, and that is ultimately, what do I want to have in terms of measurement that I can expose externally, and that can be syndicated, and where a multitude of different businesses can ultimately really be viewed through a similar lens in that form. So that's the three different layers. So often everything kind of like gets mushed together, but it's not. What I'm struggling with on a daily basis is how much time do I dedicate to each of these buckets? How much time and resources do I dedicate to each of these buckets? And then also, what can I put out to my measurement operations and to my data management and to my developers in terms of collecting that information? Because if I swear to God, if I hear one more vendor saying, oh, you just implement our pixel or our tag and it's easy. I have over 20 platforms. I have four different kind of like verticals that I have to deal with. Don't you dare and say that to me or my boss.
Every vendor out there, take notes. Sorry.
So obviously, there is that aspect. You have the technical implementation, you have measuring and figuring out the methodology, but then also, how do I resource my measurement footprint? So we can talk about all of that.
Any other thoughts on this from a content or an ad perspective? Because I think I'm gonna look at
I
Julie.
have a lot of thoughts, yeah. So Lisa knows this. So, yeah, I mean, I would say our philosophy at Hulu has been, we really do look at it the same way. There's content measurement, and then there's measurement they need to do for advertisers. And we have those two different streams that we sort of work towards too. We have a ton of data that tells us how people are watching and what they're watching. And like I said before, we just don't assess content in the same way that I think traditionally has been assessed on television. So things like demos, might not matter as much, or even like complete reach. And our first-party data tells us a lot, but it doesn't tell us how many people are actually sitting in front of the TV when that show is on or when that ad is running. And what we know is that we needed to service our advertising partners first by providing them with the tools they need to make sure that they understand how their media is resonating on Hulu through whatever KPI they're trying to measure against. So when it was easy to do on desktop back in the day, and then mobile phones came along, and then everything sort of switched to living room. So 80% of our viewing happens on a television set through something connected to the TV. And working with that technology is definitely a lot harder than back in like the days of cookies. So I've been at Hulu about 3.5 years. We started building out a whole bunch of solutions for full funnel measurement, from starting with even just brand lift, which we couldn't do, like a control exposed brand lift study. We built that out. We have now a bunch of vendors that we can run through there. Then we started building out our sort of attribution solutions, which was partnering with third-party sources like NCS for CPG, lots of acronyms coming now, Polk for auto, like all those places, tune in, there's a location-based, using our first-party data, leveraging it so we can match it, and doing those types of studies. And then we found that those actually go really slowly, right? You have to run the campaign, wait for the data, and it's not helpful. Advertisers want to optimize, they want to test. We have people who want to throw $50,000 on the service and see how it does, and then maybe they'll spend more money later. So we have to allow people to test and learn. So we ended up building our own internal solution that we'll continue to build and iterate, but it allows us to take an advertiser's CRM, attach it to an exposure file, and then we do the research for them. So we also realize, though, that's just within Hulu walls, and what every advertiser wants is the ability to holistically measure, or at least holistically plan. And I support Hulu as a marketer as well, so we have these same measurement challenges that our clients have. So we are completely interested in being included in the planning tools that exist in the ecosystem, but I will tell you right now, it is not easy. So we are talking about ways to build, but also participate in some third parties, because up until now, we've had a really healthy business, and continuing, without having a planning tool. But we hear this, I get it, like, I'm not gonna put $100 million on Hulu, and please do. without really understanding, like, what's my reach and frequency going to be, or how am I already hitting all these people someplace else? And that's a universal problem in the media landscape, but we can help solve for it, at least in the world of connected TV, because we have a huge footprint there, and in relation to at least linear TV. And then the Facebooks and the Googles at some point will have to get on board somehow, or not. Or, so we sort of always toe that line between, are we a walled garden? Are we participating in the ecosystem? And we're really both. And we're just trying to make sure that we create all the capabilities and solutions necessary to keep advertisers understanding how effective their media is when it runs on Hulu. And when it comes to content measurement, I sort of put it lower on the priority list, because we know what our content does. And if there's a day when everybody wants to throw their stuff into one place and we can all agree on some sort of third-party measurement for content, then maybe we'll participate. But that's an ongoing debate.
Well, and I think sorry, I'm going to answer a question here, but as thinking about this also in the ecosystem of agencies and profit participants and sort of all the people that are on the content monetization side, right, some transparency thing is building, so it will have to evolve to get to something where there are some sort of level playing field, so that everybody's not just using what they have on hand and nothing agrees.
Yeah. I also don't believe that those measurement frameworks should be really fully individual pieces. They should really fold together at some point. And obviously, I do understand that at the moment, you need to go where the money is. I mean, I'm in the lucky position that I'm working in a healthy SVOD business. So yes, we also have an advertising component because we have limited commercial subscription offerings, but we also have commercial-free offerings in that form. So there's also the subscription component where the monetization plays also a little bit of a different role. But it is definitely one of those areas where I want to be part of an ecosystem where we can be part of that syndicated measurement conversation, because I cannot do measurement all purely on my own, because then it will not function in the marketplace out there. So I definitely would want to see an ecosystem where we can also openly talk about measurement on all levels and openly in that form without being punished by a multitude of
To quote
aggressive
someone, and I don't know if he's
advertisers.
still here, but we both know Artie, right? Sort of measurement, it's sort of it's a team
It's
sport.
a team sport.
Right. He's right there.
So
At Pluto, there's two things that we're focusing on measurement-wise. One of them is co-viewing, right? So we've certainly run enough campaign measurement to talk to our advertisers very confidently and comfortably, and show our homework around a co-viewing coefficient. But then there are other companies who are just sort of saying what it is and not showing what their homework is, and that's really frustrating. And so it's just, I'm so accustomed to, the syndicated measurement business and everybody being able to see everything. And so this feels like, what do I do about that? Like, I can't do their campaign measurement for them, or maybe I should run a bunch of house promo campaigns on that service. But anyway, and then another one is that Pluto does have a good, about half of its viewership are among homes that don't have cable. And so for Viacom and now ViacomCBS to be able to talk to advertisers about being able to really even expand the type of audience segments that they can reach through portfolio buy is an important part of the equation. And so through fusing some ACR data with some Pluto data, we can establish what that reach extension is. And so that's just been another focus for us measurement-wise.
Yeah, now I would also add to the co-viewing thing, because I think I mentioned it before, we don't know who's sitting in front of the TV. The only way to really get at that is to work with a third party who has a panel, Nielsen ComScore. We shifted an entire currency, and it took us 2-3 years to get agencies aligned. I mean, it's not easy to change a currency in this business. The way that over-the-top viewing, ad serving had been counting was the same way as a desktop or a mobile device. Ad served to a screen, that's what you pay for. And there could be 4 people sitting in front of that screen. You don't know who they are. So we made this journey. It was a long one of working with both Nielsen and ComScore. It's their methodology. It's modeled. It is based on the panel. It's based on data. It's based on our first-party data. It's based on household composition data. It's pretty complicated, but it works. We just had to take a long road to get the industry to sort of come around to accepting that as currency. But it now others are leveraging it, and it does allow advertisers to understand how it's television. Right? Hulu is television commercials running on a television screen in a television show, it should look the same way as linear TV in terms of audience metrics, and it should be comparable in some way. And the only way to do that is to apply those types of modeling and data solutions.
So Jane's going to cut us off here, but this could go on for like much longer, maybe over drinks if anyone wants to talk to any of us. But Jane, I just wanted to thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about content. This is one of my favorite panels, but I hope everybody enjoyed this. And these are some of my favorite people too. So.
All female.
Yeah. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. That was fabulous.